The armored money transport truck looks ordinary from the outside to avoid attracting attention. However, it's bulletproof and protected against any possible break-in attempts. You would literally need a bomb to breach it. The truck was parked in a mall parking lot, with the driver sitting inside while his partner went into the mall to complete his work. After a few minutes, when the partner returned, he was shocked to find that the van had disappeared along with its driver and the $1 million that was inside it. When the investigators arrived, they were stunned because none of the people who were present around the area saw or heard anything. If thieves had stolen it, they would have needed a bomb or tremendous force to breach it. And surely someone among the people present would have noticed. So how did the truck disappear? Was the driver involved? Did the thieves invent an ingenious method to take control of it in complete silence? But how? I think you've all heard about money transport cars or trucks. Usually these trucks are heavily armored, and the driver and guards inside are armed. One of the largest money transport companies in America is Wells Fargo. This company has a fleet of money transport trucks and cars of various shapes and sizes. Our story begins on November 28, 1994, specifically in front of this mall located in the American state of Arizona. Around noon, a small truck arrived at the mall parking lot. This truck looked very ordinary, like any regular truck, but it was actually one of Wells Fargo's money transport vehicles. Despite its ordinary appearance, it was heavily fortified and armored. Beneath this exterior appearance, it concealed bulletproof armor and everything in the truck, from its external structure to its glass windows, was bulletproof and impenetrable. You would need bombs or explosive force to breach these defenses. Similarly, its doors were impossible to open from the outside. Of course, it looked very ordinary from the outside, so as not to draw attention. It was like a disguise, so no one would know it was a money transport car or truck. This van had 2 people inside. The first person was the driver, who was armed with a pistol. And with him was a person called the money collector, who was also armed with a pistol. The money collector's job was that whenever they stopped at a store or business, he would get out of the truck and go to that establishment to collect their cash earnings. Then he would take it to the truck, and the truck would transport this money to the bank. After the money collector got out of the truck, the driver remained alone waiting as usual for the money collector. The collector headed inside the mall and went to the financial department office. This office collected the cash from all the mall stores. Then this cash would be handed over to the money collector, and the money collector would take it to the van or truck. So the money collector took the cash and headed back to the van. But the surprise was that when he reached the parking lot, he found no trace of the truck. He looked right and left, but the armored van had completely disappeared. After that, the money collector contacted the police and reported the incident, and the police immediately responded while also notifying the FBI, because any case involving money transport trucks is considered a federal case. The police and FBI investigators arrived at the mall parking lot to investigate the incident, and of course, the first person they faced was the money collector. They went to him and began investigating with him. The money collector told them that from the moment he left the van until his return to it took no more than 5 minutes, and when he returned, he found neither the van nor his driver colleague present. He also told them that the total money inside the van exceeded $1 million. And keep in mind, we're talking about 1994, so if we calculated it with today's money value with inflation, this amount would reach double, meaning about $2 million. The investigators also conducted interviews with people who were present in the mall or mall parking lot, or around this area where the van was during that period. However, all the people who were there said they didn't notice anything. The investigators couldn't find even one witness who could help them describe what happened. All the people who were in the mall parking lot or around it said things were quiet and they didn't notice anything strange. Here, the investigators were puzzled. This was an armored truck that was impossible to breach without exploding bombs or tremendous force, and surely this would have caused a disturbance in the place, and someone would have noticed. And although the van's doors couldn't be opened from the outside, if somehow we said that someone, forced it open, a very loud alarm would go off that all people would hear. So if there was no explosive force or tremendous force used to breach the van, how did the van disappear in this silence? This was illogical. The investigators thought that the only logical way for something like this to happen was that the driver had a role in it. Either he himself stole the truck, or he cooperated with a gang or other people and allowed them to enter the truck, or somehow he was threatened and forced to open the truck. This was the only logical conclusion they could reach. The driver usually has a role in the matter, and actually in many cases of money truck thefts, the driver is typically an accomplice in the operation. The investigators turned their attention to the driver. The driver's name was John Cash, and he was 33 years old. Of course, the first thing the FBI did was start the search operation for the van. Police patrols spread around the area and began searching. At the same time, they also used aerial search through helicopter aircraft. The search radius was centered on the mall where the incident occurred, and this circle extended and expanded around the mall for tens of kilometers. But the focus was, of course, on the neighborhoods adjacent to the mall. The investigators knew that the person or persons responsible for stealing the van must have abandoned it as quickly as possible in the closest possible location to the mall. Surely they transferred the money to another car in a place that shouldn't be far from the mall. This was logical. They must try to get rid of it as quickly as possible. It should be nearby. The search operation continued, and during this period, the investigators began to investigate the van's driver, John Cash. The first thing they found was that he had no criminal record at all. They were able to obtain a warrant allowing them to search his apartment, and when they arrived, they had the apartment owner who rented it to him open the door. The investigators entered the apartment and began searching for anything that might indicate that the driver, John Cash, was involved in the van theft operation, but they found nothing. On the contrary, the apartment was organized and looked very normal. There was nothing to indicate or suggest that John was preparing to flee or anything of that sort, because if he had planned such an operation, he would surely have packed at least his important belongings and taken them with him. There would be chaos in the apartment or missing things, but the apartment looked normal and organized. When the investigators asked more about John Cash, they reached his relatives and some friends and acquaintances. They all testified that he was an honest, trustworthy, and very respectable person who took his job seriously. So all these testimonies, in addition to the fact that he had no criminal record or history, made the investigators initially rule him out as a suspect. But the puzzling question returned to them again. If a gang or thieves stole the truck, how were they able to enter it and breach all its protection measures without anyone at the mall noticing or hearing anything? Here, the investigators found no means before them except to turn to the media and ask for help from the general public, hoping that someone had heard or seen something suspicious. The FBI and local police held a press conference where they explained the case details and asked anyone with information that could help them to contact them. Photos and details of the van and its missing driver, John Cash, were also published, and they announced a reward of $60,000 for anyone who provides information leading to solving the case. A few hours later, the police received a report from someone saying they saw the van parked in a church parking lot, and they told them the truck matched the specifications and license plate number that the police had announced. Indeed, when the police arrived at this church parking lot, they found the missing van parked in that place. FBI investigators arrived quickly afterward. The shock came when they took a look inside the van and saw a person's body lying on the floor inside the truck. They couldn't initially identify this body because the truck was running. Its engine was on and its doors were locked from the inside, so even the investigators couldn't open the doors and enter it. At first, they had to contact the money transport company to come open the truck for them. The truck was so fortified that even the FBI and police couldn't open it. After the company employees came and opened the truck, the investigators were able to confirm the identity of the body. And as they expected, this was the body of the driver, John Cash. After the investigators examined the van up close from the inside and outside, they found no signs indicating a violent break-in. It was clear that the people who carried out the operation were experienced, and the operation was planned precisely and executed with high professionalism. The forensic experts examined the van from the inside and outside to look for any trace the perpetrators might have left behind. But the same thing. The vehicle was completely clean, with no hair or fingerprints indicating the perpetrators. All the forensic experts found were some fingerprints belonging to employees of the money transport company inside the van. There were remnants of money the thieves left behind, but they were all coins or mostly left because they were heavy and of little value. As for the cash and paper money, it was all gone. The investigators had no clear lead that could guide them to the criminals, but they began analyzing things step by step. First, they knew that the perpetrators were likely several people, meaning 2 or more, because it's very difficult for one person to carry out such an operation alone. The second point is that these people had experience in dealing with the police and had experience with police methods because they left the van in a place considered outside the city limits. Meaning its presence in this place first removes it from the search scope, and second makes it fall under the jurisdiction of another police department belonging to another city. This always complicates investigations because this city's police must communicate with that city's police, making progress in the case more difficult. During the autopsy, the forensic doctor found some parts of the bullet that hit the driver, but the parts were too small to determine the exact type of bullet. This bullet was the type that shatters into small pieces when it hits its target. Criminals who use this type of bullet usually use it so the police can't trace the bullet or the weapon used in the crime. Also, through analyzing the body, the forensic doctor reached the conclusion that the shooting was done from a slightly distant range, meaning from 10 meters and above. Meaning the shooting wasn't done from close range, because if it had been done from close range, there would be powder from the gun or weapon present on these bullet parts that he extracted from the body, but there was no trace of any powder. So the conclusion was that the shooting was done from a slightly distant range, meaning above 10 meters. The investigations continued in the days that followed. Finally, the FBI found a witness who could give them a new lead. This new witness says he saw the van after it left the mall parking lot. He said that at the same time the theft operation occurred, he was standing at a street intersection near the mall, and while standing, he saw a white van coming from the direction of the mall toward him. It was moving on the street at very high speed, and it passed in front of him maintaining its speed. He also said there was a red pickup truck following immediately at the same speed, but he wasn't sure if they were together or not. The witness, whose name was Morgan, couldn't remember any other details. He couldn't remember how many people he saw, nor could he remember the red car's license plate number. The investigators made a strange request to the witness. They asked Morgan to come with them to their office to be presented to a hypnosis expert who might stimulate his memory. Apparently, the FBI has hypnosis experts whose tasks include activating witnesses' memories. This was the first time I learned this information. Honestly, the investigators made this request to witness Morgan, and Morgan agreed and went with them to the hypnosis expert. This expert is, of course, a forensic psychologist who has certain skills and methods he can use on witnesses to preserve their memory. Of course, we humans, God gave us these minds with very high capabilities, even more than we imagine. But many of these abilities, knowledge, and memory we've acquired are buried in the subconscious mind and difficult to access and extract. So the FBI's hypnosis expert's job is to try to open the doors that lead to the subconscious mind for internal memory. I honestly don't know exactly what he does or what methods he uses, because this is a science in itself. But the goal is to try to make the witness go back in their memory and relive the incident that happened again, as if it's happening now in front of them. And indeed, witness Morgan under hypnosis went back in his memory to that moment and was able to remember how many people there were. There were 2 people in the van, and 1 person in the red pickup truck behind them. And the investigators now knew that apparently the gang numbered 3 people or more. Morgan was also able to partially remember the red pickup's license plate number. He remembered that the plate had the numbers 237, but he couldn't remember the exact order of the numbers and couldn't remember the letters or symbols, but just knowing these numbers alone was considered an achievement. The investigators began trying to search for a red pickup truck whose numbers matched the numbers Morgan mentioned. But this search gave them a result of hundreds of cars because at that time in Arizona, the police didn't record car colors in the registration license. So this was one of the obstacles that faced the investigators. But nevertheless, the investigators kept searching for this car and were able to reach a large number of pickup truck owners whose car plates had these numbers that the witness mentioned. But after dozens of interviews and follow-ups, they couldn't reach the wanted car, so, unfortunately, the car was a dead end. But the matter didn't end here. Witness Morgan, after the hypnosis session, was able to remember the appearance of one of the two men who were in the van. So the investigators brought a forensic sketch artist, and through Morgan's description, they drew a sketch of the person. This drawing was published in the media, and this person's appearance was somewhat distinctive, especially since his hair was long and his beard was in a goatee style and large. Several days after publishing this drawing in the media, the police received a call from a woman. This woman told them that she thinks she knows who this person in the drawing is, but she told them that she couldn't talk to the investigators directly because she's afraid that the people around her might suspect her, meaning the people around her might be criminals, so they might harm her. The FBI, after investigating and searching into this woman's matter, found that her license and driver's license had expired for some time, so they informed the regular police, the ones wearing police uniforms, not the investigators, to go to her house and take her on the basis that her license was expired and she had unpaid problems and fines. This was like a cover to camouflage the matter. They were actually bringing her to testify to the investigators. So the police brought this woman to the station, and the FBI investigators were able to sit with her and conduct a secret interview. She told them that she has a friend named Judy Espinoza, and that this friend Judy, as soon as she saw the drawing on television, called her and said that this man in the drawing strongly resembles her boyfriend, and she was confused about the matter. So this woman told her friend Judy to report her boyfriend to the police. But Judy apparently ignored the matter and hasn't done anything about it yet. So she decided to contact the police herself, and this led her here where the investigators thanked her for her cooperation and let her return home. Now they need to go to this friend named Judy and see what's going on with her boyfriend. The investigators went to Judy at her workplace, identified themselves, and asked her about the robbery. They asked if her boyfriend had any role in the matter and reminded her that lying in a federal investigation is a crime in itself. Judy agreed to answer their questions and told them that her boyfriend, named James Green, did indeed resemble the person who appeared in the sketch on television. She told them that after seeing the sketch, she went to him and asked him about it. But he didn't give her a clear answer and asked her what she would do if he suddenly had a lot of money. That was the answer he gave her. He dodged the question. Judy also informed the FBI that her boyfriend James had a close friend who was always with him, named Timothy Ring. She says they would sometimes go to his house, and she knows that both her boyfriend James and his friend Timothy were broke and had no money. But suddenly during the past month, she noticed they started buying new and expensive things, watches, things that should be beyond their financial means. This new information that the investigators got from Judy was excellent. They became almost certain they had their hands on the criminals. But of course, Judy's words weren't enough. It was all without evidence. They needed to find conclusive evidence to convict them. They also needed to find an answer to the puzzling question: how were they able to enter the van despite all its security measures? Did they know the driver? Did they somehow convince the driver to open the door? Did they threaten him perhaps? What exactly happened? The investigators immediately began looking into the backgrounds of these two men. First, they discovered that the second man, Timothy Ring, had a red pickup truck. Its specifications matched those mentioned by witness Morgan. However, its license plate didn't carry the same numbers that the witness mentioned while under hypnosis. But this still remained a strong thread confirming this was their wanted man. The investigators also discovered that Timothy had actually been an informant who worked for the FBI in previous cases. Of course, if you don't know what an informant is like a spy who works with criminals or gangs, but at the same time works with the police and reports on his associates. They can profit from both sides, from criminal activities like theft, and also from the police or FBI who pay them for the information they provide, while at the same time receiving immunity for the things they report on. The investigators also discovered that these two men had previously worked as prison guards and had undergone professional training in weapons use. All of this confirmed the specifications the investigators had from the beginning. They knew the operation's perpetrators were professionals with experience in dealing with police and security forces. This, of course, made the investigators' task more difficult because now they had to monitor and follow them to find incriminating evidence. But because these two men were professionals, monitoring them would be difficult without them noticing. Their level of attention would be higher compared to the average person. So the FBI agents who would monitor them had to be very careful while following them. The FBI assigned ground surveillance teams and even an aerial surveillance team on them. These surveillance teams would follow them 24 hours a day. During surveillance, FBI agents noticed that James and his friend Timothy were spending large amounts of money on various things. According to the investigators' inquiries, neither James nor Timothy were working or had any legitimate source of income for this money. The surveillance were photographing and documenting every person they met with. James and Timothy knew that there was at least one additional person with them in the operation. After several weeks of surveillance, the FBI finally reached the person they believed to be the third partner in the operation, a bearded man named William Ferguson. After investigating this man's background, the investigators learned that he had actually been a police officer but was forced into early retirement due to some problems he got into. So his specifications matched those of someone who could be a partner in the operation. Someone expert with weapons, knowledgeable about police procedures, and with a bad record. So the FBI set their sights on him and began monitoring all three: James Green, Timothy Ring, and William Ferguson. Later, the investigators received new information that confirmed they were on the right track. Someone came to the department and gave them information. This person's name was Michael Sanders, who told them that during last November, the month when the robbery took place, he and James Green were together scouting and investigating money transport trucks. He told them that there was a former police officer named Fergie who was helping them, but he never met him. So this person named Michael Sanders apparently was going to be the fourth partner with them in the operation. But it seems they dropped him and left him aside and carried out the operation without him. So now, because he was upset in revenge, he came to report them. And although he didn't know the former police officer's full name, only knowing his nickname Fergie, it was clear that Fergie was short for William Ferguson. So with this information confirmed that the investigators were on the right track. But this person's words remained just words without conclusive evidence, so they needed to continue surveillance work to find their conclusive evidence. One of the tactics they used in searching for evidence was searching through garbage. When one of the three suspects would throw away their garbage, the surveillance would immediately go retrieve the garbage bag they threw and then search through it for any evidence that might help them with the conviction. In one of the bags, they found papers with written and drawn information about money transport truck movement routes. This wasn't conclusive evidence, but it was useful evidence to add to the things they had. After a period of surveillance, unfortunately, the investigators couldn't find new evidence, and after consulting, they decided to try to create this evidence themselves. But how would they create evidence? Simply, they would try to record audio recordings of the suspects confessing to their crime. Of course, this required a well-planned strategy to succeed through surveillance. The investigators were almost certain that the three were using James Green's apartment as a meeting center because his apartment was the place they met most often. This made sense because the other two had families living with them. So naturally, their meetings would take place in the home of the person who didn't have a family, which was James Green. So the FBI decided to install listening devices in his apartment. And one night, after making sure James was out of the apartment, some FBI agents snuck into his apartment cleanly, meaning without showing any signs of break-in or broken door locks or anything of that sort, so he wouldn't discover it. Then they set up and installed the listening devices in hidden places so no one would detect them. When they finished, they took their equipment and left. So now they could listen to the conversations taking place between them in James's apartment. The FBI was also tapping their phones and calls. Of course, the investigators knew that the three suspects wouldn't talk about the operation randomly like that, so they had to do something to motivate them to talk. The investigators decided to release misleading information that might push the three to talk about the operation. The FBI issued a press release containing incorrect information and wrong details about the operation. For example, they mentioned characteristics very different from the suspects. They said one had dark skin and one was bald, and they kept making up details very far from the three suspects. After this press release, they listened and waited for the three to meet because they were sure they would talk about it. Indeed, the three met in James's apartment as usual, and as expected, they began talking about the information mentioned in the press release. They talked about the case while laughing and happy because the investigations were completely far from them. But despite this and despite the discussions that took place between them, they didn't explicitly state that they were the ones who carried out the operation. So this was the missing piece. True, the evidence that the FBI had was respectable and could build a strong case against them. But the FBI's style is always that they don't conclude an investigation until they have that evidence from which it's impossible for the criminal to escape in any way. So the investigators continued listening in hopes of getting something new. They sometimes picked up useful conversations or calls. For example, one day they picked up a call between Timothy and William, talking about buying expensive cars. And they were worried that if they bought them, it might draw attention to them. The call didn't end here. Timothy mentioned later in the call that his pressure started rising because of the third member with them, who was James, and he kept saying about him that he was becoming weak and nervous, and this made him afraid that he would do something wrong and expose them. What we understand from this conversation is that Timothy kept James's share with him, meaning he didn't give him all his money because he didn't trust him and was giving him his money in drops, giving him an amount every now and then. All this to control him so James would stay under Timothy's control. Through these conversations, the investigators understood that Timothy was probably the leader and that James was just a follower, and it seemed that William, the former police officer, was closer to Timothy, meaning Timothy treated him like a colleague, unlike James, whom he treated as just a follower. The investigators also noticed through the conversations that Timothy had violent tendencies, and his way of speaking and style was crude and harsh, and it was clear that he was reflecting this cruelty on James. The investigators knew that James was the weakest link. Imagine that he even used him like a messenger to buy groceries from the supermarket. He even made him buy his underwear. God honor you. So James was like a toy for Timothy. So here the investigators decided to focus on James and try to make him more nervous. One of the things they did was leave papers with his face drawn on them in front of his apartment door, and when he saw the drawing, he was surprised and scared. But he didn't immediately assume it was the police or FBI. Maybe one of the neighbors or people around him who were envious of him saw that he looked like the person in the drawing and decided to play a prank on him. But then a few days later, one of the investigators put a card like a business card with his name and phone number on James's apartment door. And on the back of this card was written Evidence 103. The investigators watched James's reaction when he found it. When James saw the card and saw written on it the investigator's name, here he immediately felt fear. And when he turned the card over and saw written on the back Evidence 103, here he knew he was in trouble. He immediately felt this was related to their operation. Surely the police were suspecting him and watching him. James immediately retreated and left his apartment, got in his car and left. The FBI were following him, but this time from the air with a helicopter so he wouldn't notice them. James kept driving further and further away until he reached an empty place in the middle of the desert practically. Then he got out of the car and called his friend Timothy. James was very nervous while talking to Timothy. He told him that he found an investigator's card with evidence 103 written on it on his door, and that he was afraid the police were watching his house and suspecting him. Timothy kept trying to calm him down and reassure him and told him not to be afraid. Just return home and act normally and trust me, everything will be fine. And he told him that he would come to him the next day and talk with him. James returned to his apartment and slept that night. The next morning, he went to James' apartment. Of course, the apartment had listening devices, so the investigators heard the entire conversation. The conversation was long, lasting about an hour. Timothy was trying to calm James, who was clearly tense and uncomfortable. At the end of their conversation, Timothy told him that if the police had evidence against him, they would have raided his apartment and arrested him. After hearing this conversation, the investigators knew they had gathered enough evidence against them, even though they hadn't explicitly stated that they were the ones who carried out the operation. The evidence against them was clear to any rational person, so they decided it was time to move and arrest them. The next morning, arrest warrants were issued and police forces moved toward their homes. James Green was arrested at his home without resistance. As for William Ferguson, the former police officer, he tried to resist, but the officers subdued and arrested him. Regarding Timothy, we mentioned before that he worked as an informant on previous cases for the FBI. The FBI called him and asked him to come in regarding one of the cases he had worked on as an informant previously. He said, "Fine, I'll come to you." Of course, he didn't know that this summons was actually a trap to arrest him at the FBI office. The footage you see here is real footage showing Timothy entering the FBI office. There were undercover agents waiting for him in the lobby to arrest him. Why did they make this move? Why did they summon him to their office instead of going to arrest him? The reason is simple. They believed Timothy was the most dangerous among them. If they went to arrest him, he might be armed and resist, leading to gunfire and possibly death. But if they summoned him to their office as an informant, he surely wouldn't be carrying his weapon into the FBI office, so the undercover agents quickly surprised and overwhelmed him before he could react. Thus, all three were arrested and in FBI custody. The next step was searching their homes and residences. Among the evidence found in Timothy's house was a paper showing how the money was divided between the three of them. They had written the first letter of their names and listed the total amount stolen, distributing a percentage to each of them. This paper was added to the evidence list against them. In his garage, they found his red pickup truck, but as mentioned before, its license plate was completely different from the numbers that witness Morgan had recalled under hypnosis. The investigators said the witness couldn't remember well. The investigators also found a bag containing a large amount of cash in Timothy's house. During their search of the other suspects' homes, they found almost all of the $1 million stolen from the truck. Only about $100,000 was missing, which they likely spent during the past 3 months. Of course, now the evidence against them was conclusive. They would win the case 100%. The investigators interrogated the three suspects. William Ferguson refused to talk or cooperate with the investigation in any way, despite all the evidence against him. James Green was the only one who showed some remorse for the crime they committed. The investigators always knew he was the weakest link, and if any of them would talk, it would be him. But even James initially refused to talk, and the investigators spent a full hour with him trying to convince him. The whole time he was just mumbling incomprehensibly. But finally, after much pressure and attempts, James told them that TM, abbreviation for Timothy. After this confession, James agreed to talk and cooperate with investigators, telling them the details of the operation, what role each of them played, and how they managed to take over the money truck despite all its security measures and protection. James told them that planning for the operation began about 6 months before executing it. He said Timothy was the mastermind behind the idea and encouraged them to join him. Initially, they tracked and monitored a large number of money transport trucks. They would follow these trucks, map their routes, and note their stopping locations and movement times. After several months of monitoring and tracking, they found the suitable target, the truck driven by the murdered driver John McGash. They focused on this truck, mapped its route, and studied it thoroughly from A to Z. One of the reasons they chose this particular truck was its stop at the mall during lunch hours. They knew the mall would have fewer people during lunchtime. John would always park in the same spot in exactly the same place. All these factors would help them execute their operation without anyone noticing. The mall was almost the last stop for the truck, meaning they would have collected a large amount of money since morning as they visited various stores and businesses. So the three would hit the truck when it had the maximum possible amount of money. The most important reason of all was that they noticed the driver, John McGash, would open the van door and smoke a cigarette every time he stopped at this mall. This was the vulnerability they needed to breach all the truck's defenses. Of course, the money transport company's rules prohibited this. They forbade drivers from opening the truck door while stopped. But it seems John McGash was lax, and his smoking habit was stronger than he could resist. Even their choice of operation date was planned. They chose November 28 because during Thanksgiving, store and business operations would be thriving, so the truck would collect more cash amounts than usual. So even their date selection was precise and planned, not random. On execution day, James and William Ferguson were standing and waiting. They first waited until the money collector got down from the truck and walked toward the mall to collect money from the designated section. Immediately after, as usual, they saw driver John McGash take out his cigarette and open the door slightly to smoke. Some of you might ask why he didn't just lower the window instead of opening the door. The simple answer is that the window doesn't roll down at all. This is one of the security features of these trucks. So he had to open the door to let the smoke out. He would open the door very slightly, maybe about 20 centimeters. But this small opening was enough for a shooting expert like Timothy Ring to snipe through it. He had undergone professional training in rifles and sniping, and even participated in shooting competitions. He was waiting at a not-too-distant location in the red pickup truck, maybe about 15 meters from the van. When he saw the driver open the door, he prepared his rifle and aimed it at him. The rifle also had a silencer. This prevented the shot sound from attracting attention from anyone who might be in the vicinity. Through the small door opening, he managed to hit the driver with a shot to the side of the head. By the way, according to forensic analysis of the body, the driver didn't die immediately. He remained alive for a while before dying, meaning the poor man died a painful death. After the driver fell, James and William immediately got into the van and drove it out of the mall, with Timothy following in his red pickup truck. All this happened without anyone around the mall or parking lot noticing, because the operation was completely silent, so no one noticed anything strange. The van kept driving on the street with the red pickup behind it until they reached the church parking lot. Of course, as mentioned before, this church was considered outside city limits, meaning they entered another city, and this was part of their plan. They knew this would delay police finding the van. Additionally, it would involve more than one police department in the case, which would further delay case proceedings. After stopping in the church parking lot, they immediately began transferring money from the truck to the pickup. They left behind only the coins or metal currency. Then they left the van in the church parking lot and immediately moved to an isolated place in the desert. There, they burned all their clothes and all evidence that could point to them. During his confessions, James also told investigators that the pickup truck's license plate was fake, and they buried this fake plate in the desert where they burned the evidence. The investigators asked James to take them to this location, and James agreed. There, the investigators indeed found a pile of burned items, clothes and belongings clearly used by the three during the operation, and they were also able to recover the fake pickup plate that the three had disposed of. Surprisingly, the fake plate carried the same numbers that witness Morgan had mentioned while under hypnosis. The hypnosis apparently worked amazingly well. Finally, the three suspects were tried and sentenced. For James Green and former police officer William Ferguson, they received similar sentences since they were accomplices in the operation. They were each given about 30 years in prison. As for the mastermind, since he was the planner of this operation and the shooter who fired at the driver, he would certainly face the harshest sentence among them. At the beginning of his trial, Timothy claimed innocence and denied being the driver's killer, and his case continued in court. For years, whenever he appeared in the media, he would insist he was innocent and that the FBI was pinning this charge on him. He and his lawyer kept trying to present weak defenses in court, but in the end, the jury found him guilty, and the judge sentenced him to death in 1997. However, it appears that the death sentence wasn't carried out. His case was transferred to the Supreme Court, where the death sentence was overturned, and currently Timothy is serving a life sentence. As I read the case details, it seems the reason for overturning the death sentence was due to some laws that existed in Arizona, and that the judge had imposed the death sentence without the jury, meaning he decided on his own. So the matter involved legal details and somewhat complicated issues. The bottom line is that the death sentence wasn't carried out, and he's currently serving a life sentence in prison. And here we reach the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed it as usual. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button. Here are more interesting stories you can watch. Thank you for following. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.